Rain slicked the marble steps of the Rossi estate, and Isabella Rossi stood at the top of them in a dress that did not belong to her, feeling like a parcel that had been wrapped for someone else's Christmas. The gown was the colour of dried blood, chosen by her stepmother because it photographed well under chandeliers, and because Renata Rossi understood, with the cold precision of a jeweller weighing a stone, exactly how much a woman was worth when she was displayed correctly. Bella's dark hair had been pinned so tightly her scalp ached. Her feet, in borrowed heels a half size too small, had gone numb an hour ago. None of it was for her comfort. None of it ever was. "Smile," Renata murmured beside her, not moving her painted lips. "You look like you're being led to slaughter." "I am," Bella thought. But she smiled, because she had learned before she was 12 that the smile was the only currency in this house that cost her nothing, yet bought a night of peace. Below them, the ballroom of the Harrison Hotel glittered like the inside of a broken chandelier. Old money, new money, and the kind of money that never explained itself, moved between waiters carrying trays of champagne. Somewhere in that crowd was director Vincent Harrison, 53, balding, soft in the middle, and rich enough that the Rossi family had decided he would be the answer to everything they had ruined. The answer, specifically, was Bella. "Vincent has been asking about you," Renata went on. "He finds you refreshing." "Do you know what that means, Isabella? It means you have not yet opened your mouth long enough to disappoint him." "Keep it that way." "Yes, Renata. You will call him Mr. Harrison. You will laugh at what he says, and tonight, when the deal is signed, you will understand that you have finally, for once in your useless life, been worth something to this family." The words landed the way they always did, not as insults exactly, but as facts, delivered with the bored certainty of a woman reciting a grocery list. Bella had stopped bleeding from them years ago. Mostly. Her stepsister, Ottavia, appeared on Renata's other side, resplendent in emerald silk, her blonde hair loose and gleaming. Ottavia was 2 years older, twice as beautiful in the obvious way that men noticed from across rooms, and she had hated Bella since the day Bella's father had married Renata and brought his quiet, dark-eyed daughter into their lives like a stray he'd found in the rain. "She looks nervous," Ottavia said, smiling. "Doesn't she look nervous, Mother?" "She looks fine. I just think—" Ottavia touched Bella's arm, a gesture that from a distance would read as sisterly and up close felt like a claw. "I want tonight to go perfectly, for the family. Don't you, Bella?" There was something in her stepsister's eyes that Bella didn't like, a brightness, a held breath. But then the string quartet swelled, and Vincent Harrison was crossing the floor toward them, with his hand already extended, and there was no more time to wonder. "Isabella." Harrison took her fingers, pressed his damp lips to her knuckles. His eyes travelled down the red dress and back up, with the frank ownership of a man inspecting a car he intended to buy. "You are even lovelier than your photographs." "Thank you, Mr. Harrison." "Vincent, please." He tucked her hand into the crook of his arm, as though it belonged there. "Come, let me introduce you to some very boring men who are about to become very useful to your family." And that was how it began, the last ordinary hour of Isabella Rossi's ordinary, unbearable life. She let herself be led. She smiled. She laughed at the right moments. She did not know that across the room, Ottavia was watching a waiter carry a specific glass toward a specific tray, and that the glass was meant for her. She did not know that by morning everything would be broken. She only knew that her father, before the cancer took him and left her to these women, had once told her, "Endure, piccola. The Rossis always endure." She had held on to those words the way a drowning girl holds a plank. But her father had been wrong about a great many things, and the Rossis, she was about to learn, did not endure at all. They simply fed their own to whatever wolf paid the most. Harrison steered her toward the bar. "You'll have a drink?" It was not a question. Bella nodded, and a glass of pale gold champagne appeared before her, condensation weeping down its side. She lifted it. Harrison lifted his. Across the room, Ottavia lifted hers too and smiled, and Bella, for reasons she could not name, felt the fine hairs on her arms rise, as though something in the air had shifted the moment before a storm. She drank. The champagne was cold and dry and perfect, and for a moment nothing happened at all, and Bella allowed herself the small, dishonest comfort of pretending this was an ordinary evening, that she was an ordinary girl at an ordinary party, and not the last asset of a bankrupt house being paraded before a man who would own her by month's end. Around her the room performed its rituals of wealth. A senator's wife laughed too loudly at something. A young man Bella recognized as the son of a shipping family stood too close to a woman who was not his wife. Everywhere the same weather of appetite and calculation, the same understanding that everyone here was either buying or being bought, and that the trick of survival was never to let anyone see which one you were. Bella had learned that trick young. She had learned it the year her father died, and she understood, standing at the graveside beside women who wept for the money and not the man, that she was alone in the world in every way that mattered, and that the only person who would ever look out for Isabella Rossi was Isabella Rossi. So she had made herself small and useful and quiet. She had learned which of Renata's moods could be soothed and which had to be endured. She had learned to become furniture, because furniture is not sold, and furniture is not struck. And for a few years it had almost worked. And then she had turned 16, and grown into a face that men noticed across rooms, and Renata had looked at her one morning over the breakfast dishes with an expression Bella had never seen before. Not contempt, for once, but assessment. The look of a woman who has found a forgotten banknote in an old coat. From that morning, Bella had understood exactly what she was for. "Isabella!" Harrison's voice pulled her back. He was watching her over the rim of his glass with an indulgent little smile, as though her silence were a charming quirk he intended to correct after the wedding. "You've gone somewhere far away. Come back. Tell me, do you dance?" "A little," Bella said. "Then you'll dance with me, once the tedious men are done with me." He said it the way a man refers to an errand. "You'll find, my dear, that I am not so terrible a bargain as your face at this moment suggests. I am generous with the things I own. Ask anyone." He leaned in, and she smelled cigars and expensive cologne, and beneath it something sour. "And I take very good care of what's mine." What's mine? Bella held her smile in place by an act of will that cost her more than he would ever know. Across the room she caught Ottavia watching them, that bright, held breath look still in her eyes, and beside her Renata, serene as a cathedral. Two women who had decided her fate over wine and settled it with a handshake. She lifted her glass again, if only to have somewhere to put her hands. 16 floors above the ballroom, in a penthouse suite that occupied the entire top corner of the Harrison Hotel, Salvatore Moretti was washing blood off his hands. He did it slowly, methodically, watching the water run pink and then clear in the marble sink. The blood was not his. It belonged to a man named Fausto Belandi, who 3 hours ago had been the Moretti family's chief accountant, and who was now, thanks to a habit of skimming and a fatal lack of imagination, nothing at all. Sal was 33 years old, and had been the head of his family for 11 of them. He had inherited the empire the way one inherits a loaded gun, suddenly, and with his father's blood still warm on the floor. In 11 years he had doubled the family's holdings, buried 4 rivals, and earned a reputation across the American underworld as a man without warmth, without weakness, and, this was the part that amused him, when anything did, without appetite. They whispered about it. He knew they whispered. Salvatore Moretti, who had never been seen with a woman, not a mistress, not a wife, not a girl on his arm at any of the 1,000 functions where men like him displayed beautiful women like watches. The rumours had grown their own mythology. He was impotent, they said. He was sterile. He was carved from the same cold stone as the saints in his mother's old church, incapable of the thing that made other men weak. Let them talk. The rumours were useful. A man with no desires had no leverage points, no soft places where a knife could go in. The truth was uglier, and Sal had spent 2 decades making sure no one alive knew it. He dried his hands and looked at himself in the mirror, the dark hair going silver at one temple, the jaw that had been broken once and set slightly wrong, the eyes his enemies called dead and his few friends called tired. He had drunk half a bottle of Amarone since Fausto's body had been carried out through the service elevator, and the room had begun, pleasantly, to blur at its edges. His lieutenant, Enzo, knocked and entered without waiting. "It's done. Cleaned up. The family thinks he flew to Zurich." "Good. You should come down. Harrison's throwing his circus. Half the East Coast is here. It looks strange, you not showing your face." "I don't care how it looks." "I know you don't." Enzo hesitated. He was the only man on earth who dared to hesitate in front of Sal Moretti. They had grown up together, bled together. "You've been up here alone every night this week, Sal, drinking. That thing with Fausto was necessary." "I didn't say it wasn't." Enzo set a glass down on the sideboard. "Get some sleep. I've put men on the floor and the elevator. Nobody comes up who shouldn't." When he was gone, Sal poured the last of the wine and carried it to the wall of glass that made up the western face of the penthouse. The city bled light beneath him. Somewhere down there, men were being made rich and men were being made corpses, and the two were more often the same men than anyone liked to admit. He was so tired. Not of the killing. He had made a private peace with that long ago. He was tired of the aloneness, though he would have cut out his own tongue before saying the word aloud. Tired of the 22 years he had spent unable to let a woman close enough to touch him without the old horror rising in his throat like bile. The therapists his consigliere had quietly arranged back when Sal was young enough to think it could be fixed had used clinical words: trauma-conditioned aversion, gynophobic response. They had not helped. Nothing had helped. The last time a woman had put her hand on his chest, a beautiful, willing woman in a hotel not unlike this one, he had frozen so completely he'd thought he was dying. And then he had left her there and never tried again. He had made his peace with that too, or told himself he had. The wine was warm and dark, and it made the memory of his mother's perfume rise up unbidden, jasmine and something bitter underneath, and Sal shut his eyes against it. He would not think of her tonight. He would not think of the blue room, or the sounds through the wall, or what his father had done when he found out, or the small closed casket that had been too light when the men carried it. He drank. The room turned soft. He crossed to the enormous bed without undressing and lay across it in the dark, and for once, blessedly, sleep came fast. He did not lock the door. Why would he? Enzo's men were on the elevator. Nobody came up who shouldn't. 16 floors below, a girl in a red dress was beginning, very slowly, to feel her skin catch fire. The first thing Bella noticed was the heat. It started in her chest, a warmth like the champagne had gone straight to her heart instead of her head, and then it spread, down her arms, into her belly, lower, until her whole body felt as though it had been dipped in something molten. Her thoughts turned slippery. The ballroom's lights doubled and swam. When Harrison said something to her, she heard the shape of the words but not their meaning, and she realized with a distant, floating alarm that she could not remember how many times she had answered him with a laugh. "You're flushed," Harrison said, and his voice had changed, lower, hungrier. His hand found the small of her back. "Perhaps you need some air, or perhaps—" His fingers pressed, somewhere quieter. Something was wrong. Bella knew it, the way an animal knows the ground has begun to shake before the humans feel it. Her heart slammed. Her breath came short. The heat was not champagne. She had felt tipsy before, and this was not that. This was her own body turning traitor, some chemical alchemy roaring through her blood, making her want to press herself against the nearest wall, the nearest anything, and weep. Drugged. The word surfaced through the fog. Someone drugged me. She pulled away from Harrison so hard she nearly fell. "I need the powder room. Isabella, please." She fled. Through the crowd, past the string quartet, past a blur of tuxedos and diamonds, until she found a corridor, and then an elevator, and she stabbed at buttons with a shaking hand, needing only to be alone, to be somewhere the fire could burn itself out without 100 eyes watching her come apart. She did not know that Ottavia had bribed a hotel attendant that afternoon. She did not know that the plan, Ottavia's plan, hatched with Renata over a bottle of Barolo, had been for the drugged, desperate Bella to be discreetly guided to Harrison's own suite, where the director would find a girl too far gone to refuse him, and where a compromise, witnessed by the right people, would make the marriage a matter of honour to be settled within the week. A soiled bride, a quick contract, and Ottavia, having watched her stepsister debased, would step forward as the family's remaining respectable daughter for the next, richer suitor already circling. She did not know that the bribed attendant, seeing a girl in red staggering toward the elevators exactly as promised, had pressed the key card to the reader and murmured a floor and a suite number, and that in the noise and the chaos he had transposed 2 digits, or been given them wrong, or simply not cared, because the money was already in his pocket. She only knew that the elevator rose, and that a soft mechanical voice said a floor, and that the doors opened onto a hush so complete it felt like the inside of a held breath. The corridor up here was different, darker, richer. One door at the end stood very slightly ajar, a thin blade of warm light falling across the carpet, and Bella, burning, weeping past reason, walked toward it, because it was the only door that was open, and open meant a person, and a person meant help. She pushed it wide. The suite beyond was enormous and nearly dark, the city glittering through a wall of glass, and on the vast bed, in the half-light, a man lay sprawled in a black shirt, with his eyes closed, one arm flung above his head, his breathing deep and slow. "Please," Bella whispered, "something's wrong with me. I think someone—" The man stirred. His eyes opened, dark, unfocused, heavy with wine and sleep. He looked at her, the way a man looks at something in a dream, without alarm, without the wary calculation she would later learn never left his face when he was sober. "Who are you?" he said. It wasn't quite a question. "I don't know where I am." Her legs gave. She caught herself on the edge of the bed, and the moment her hand touched the mattress, the heat surged so violently she made a sound she didn't recognize as her own. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I can't." And Salvatore Moretti, drunk and half-dreaming, defences dissolved by wine in a way 22 years of sober vigilance had never once allowed, did not freeze. He reached for her. Later, much later, they would each try to reconstruct that night and find only fragments. The scent of jasmine that was not jasmine, that was only her. The impossible, unfamiliar peace of a body against his that did not trigger the old terror. The desperate, drug-bright need in her that met something starved in him and, for one night only, in the dark, with neither of them fully themselves, made a kind of sense no daylight would ever explain. They did not speak of who they were. They did not know. And when the grey light came, Bella woke first. Consciousness returned to Bella in pieces, and each piece was worse than the last. First, warmth. A heavy arm across her waist, a wall of male heat against her back, the slow tide of another person's breathing. For one confused, drifting moment it was not unpleasant. It was, in fact, the safest she had felt in years, and that feeling alone should have terrified her. Then, memory. The champagne, the fire in her blood, the elevator, the open door, the stranger's dark eyes. The night itself, returning in fragments so vivid, her face flooded with heat all over again. The things she had done, the things she had wanted, the low, broken sounds the man had made against her throat, as though he had forgotten how. Then, horror. Bella's eyes flew open. Grey dawn filled the enormous room. She was naked beneath a sheet, in a bed the size of a small country, and the arm across her belonged to a man she had never seen before last night, a man whose face was turned into the pillow, his features slack, in a sleep so deep it looked almost like unconsciousness. She did not know his name. The knowledge arrived like ice water. She had spent the night, she had lost her virginity, to a stranger, in the wrong room, while drugged out of her mind. And downstairs, 16 floors down, was the wreckage of a plan she was only now beginning to understand had been laid for her by her own family. They drugged me. The clarity of it made her want to be sick. Ottavia. It had to be Ottavia. The bright, held-breath look in her stepsister's eyes, the specific glass. And it had gone wrong. She had run. She had come to the wrong floor, the wrong room, the wrong man. And whatever this stranger was, whatever this suite with its silent guards and its wall of glass 16 floors above everyone else signified, it was not Vincent Harrison's suite. And that meant the plan had failed. And that meant she was ruined for nothing. A soiled bride with no marriage to make it respectable, damaged goods that could not even be sold. When Renata found out, and Renata would find out, there would be no bottom to how far Bella would fall. Move. She had to move. Slowly, holding her breath, Bella lifted the man's arm. He murmured something, a name maybe, or a curse, and rolled onto his back without waking. And in the strengthening light, she saw his face fully for the first time. Hard. Beautiful in a brutal way, like something carved for a cathedral roof to frighten off demons. There was a scar through one eyebrow, and old bruising on his knuckles, and even asleep he did not look gentle. He looked like a man the world was afraid of. And for one strange, suspended second, Bella felt not fear, but grief, as though she were leaving something she would never find again. Then she gathered the red dress from where it lay pooled on the floor and fled. She dressed in the marble bathroom with shaking hands, splashed water on her face, avoided the mirror. Her body ached in unfamiliar places. The fire in her blood had burned itself out in the night and left only ash and shame. She let herself out through the suite's double doors, past 2 men in dark suits who straightened at the sight of her. She kept her head down, kept moving, and to her astonishment they let her pass, exchanging a single, unreadable glance, because whatever their orders had been about who came up, no one had thought to give them orders about a woman coming down. The elevator. The lobby, grey and empty in the dawn. The revolving door. The cold, wet street. Bella walked 6 blocks before she let herself cry. And then she cried so hard, a stranger stopped to ask if she was hurt, and she laughed at that, a terrible, cracked laugh, because how could she possibly explain? She did not know she had just left the bed of Salvatore Moretti. She did not know that up in the penthouse an hour later a man would wake with a splitting head and a body that felt, inexplicably, less like a clenched fist than it had in 20 years, and reach across the cooling sheets for something that was already gone. Sal woke to the smell of her. It clung to the pillow, to the sheets, to the collar of the shirt he had somehow ended up half wearing. A scent he could not name, warm and faintly sweet, and beneath it something that was simply skin, simply woman. And the strangest thing, the thing that made him sit up too fast and grip his aching skull, was that the smell did not repel him. It should have. Any trace of a woman in his bed, in his space, should have set off the old alarm, the crawling need to scrub himself clean, to be alone. Instead, he found himself lifting the pillow to his face, like a man half his age, breathing in, trying to hold on to a night that came back to him only in shards. A woman in red, dark eyes, wet with something. Please, something's wrong with me. His own hands reaching, without the terror. Reaching without the terror. Sal sat very still in the wrecked bed as the enormity of that settled over him. "Enzo," he said when his lieutenant answered the phone. His voice came out rough. "There was a woman here last night." A pause. "Here? In your—" "Find her." The Rossi townhouse smelled of lilies and money that no longer existed. Bella let herself in through the servants' entrance, still in last night's dress, and made it halfway up the back stairs before Renata's voice stopped her like a hand around the throat. "Isabella." She turned. Her stepmother stood in the doorway of the morning room in a silk robe, a cup of espresso in one hand, her face perfectly composed and perfectly cold. Behind her, curled in an armchair, Ottavia watched with the avid stillness of a cat at a mouse-hole. "Where," Renata said, "have you been?" There was no version of the truth Bella could tell. So she said nothing, and her silence, her wrinkled dress, her ruined hair, told the story for her. Ottavia's face did something complicated, triumph and confusion at once. "Well," she said, "how was dear Vincent? Did he—" She leaned forward. "Did everything go the way it was supposed to?" And Bella understood then the full shape of what had been done to her. The way you spoke to it, the way you already knew there'd been a room, a plan, a fall. "You drugged me," she said quietly. The espresso cup did not so much as tremble in Renata's hand. "Don't be hysterical. You put something in my glass. You wanted Harrison to—" Bella's voice broke. "You wanted him to find me like that, so he'd have to marry me." "And instead," Renata said, setting the cup down with a click, "you disappeared for the entire night and reappear looking like a common streetwalker, and Vincent Harrison called me at 7 this morning to withdraw from the arrangement because his bride-to-be abandoned him in the middle of his own party. So, since you insist on discussing it—" She crossed the room, and up close Bella could see the fury beneath the ice, the tiny muscle jumping at her jaw. "Where were you?" "I don't know." It was almost the truth. "I don't know where I was. I don't know who—" She stopped. Something flickered in Renata's eyes. "Who?" she repeated softly. "Who, Isabella?" "No one. A room. I was sick. I don't remember." The slap came so fast, Bella didn't see it. Her head snapped sideways. The taste of copper bloomed on her tongue. In the armchair, Ottavia made a small, satisfied sound. "Do you understand what you have cost this family?" Renata's voice never rose. That was the terror of her. "The Harrison deal was everything. The banks are at the door. Your late father left us nothing but debt and this rotting house, and the one thing you were ever going to be good for, you managed to ruin in a single night. You are not a daughter. You never were. You are an expense your father saddled me with, and now you are not even a useful one." Bella pressed her hand to her burning cheek and said nothing. There was nothing to say. It was all true in the arithmetic of this house, and the only untruth was the one thing she would never tell them, that somewhere in this city was a man whose name she didn't know, whose bed she had shared, whose scent she could still find on her own skin if she was foolish enough to breathe in. "Go to your room," Renata said, turning away. "Stay there. I need to think about how to salvage this. There are other men, older, perhaps, less particular." A pause. "There is always someone who will pay for a young wife. if the family throws in enough to make her worth the trouble. Ottavia's laugh followed Bella up the stairs. In her small, cold room at the top of the house, the servants' room, really, the one she'd been given when Ottavia decided the good bedroom should be a dressing room, Bella sat on the narrow bed and shook. Not from the slap, from the strange, unbearable double knowledge that she had been more powerless last night than she had ever been in her life, drugged and used as a pawn. And yet, that in the arms of that nameless stranger she had felt, for a few hours in the dark, like a person instead of a price. She would never see him again. She knew that. Men who slept 16 floors above everyone else, guarded by silent men in suits, did not go looking for girls who fled at dawn. She did not cry again. She had cried it all out on the street. Instead, she lay back on the thin mattress and stared at the water-stained ceiling, and began, with the grim practicality that was the only inheritance her real mother had left her, to plan how she might survive whatever came next. She was 17 days from discovering she was pregnant. She was 3 weeks from being sold to a man 40 years her senior. And she was, though she could not have imagined it, 31 days from the night Salvatore Moretti's men would finally find the girl in the red dress, and from the moment the whole world she knew would come apart, and something far more dangerous would begin. The nausea came first, 3 weeks later, in the grey hour before dawn. Bella made it to the little bathroom at the end of the hall and was sick, quietly, her forehead pressed to the cold porcelain. And when it passed, she sat back on her heels and did the arithmetic she had been refusing to do for days. The dates, the tenderness in her breasts, the way certain smells, the lilies Renata insisted on, the espresso, the perfume Ottavia wore, had begun to turn her stomach. She knew, before the test confirmed it. She had known some animal part of her for over a week. She bought the test at a pharmacy 40 minutes' walk from the house, paid cash, took it in the public restroom of a coffee shop so no trace would ever exist under this roof. 2 lines. She stared at them for a long time in the fluorescent light and felt the whole architecture of her small survival collapse and reassemble around a single new and terrible fact. She was carrying a secret that would change everything, a secret born from one unforgettable night. There had been no one else. There had never been anyone else. She didn't know his name. His face appeared only in fading dreams, and even his scent had slipped beyond her memory. Bella stood in the tiny bathroom, clutching the test against her chest as her heart pounded. Fear settled deep inside her. If Renata ever discovered the truth, nothing in her life would remain the same. In that quiet moment, Bella made herself a promise. She would tell no one. She would keep the secret hidden for as long as she could. Somehow, she would find a way to leave, to build a new life in a different city before the truth caught up with her. She had only a few small bills and handfuls of coins tucked inside the lining of an old coat, but for now, that fragile hope was all she had. It was not much. It would have to be enough. She had 4 weeks, maybe 5, before it began to show. She had, it turned out, 6 days, because on the 6th day, Renata called her down to the morning room, and there was a man sitting in her late father's chair, and he was old. "Isabella," Renata said, and her voice was for once almost warm, the warmth of a woman who has found a buyer for something she was afraid she'd be stuck with. "I'd like you to meet Don Cesare Vitale." The old man rose. He was perhaps 65, silver-haired, expensively dressed, with the smooth, predatory patience of the very wealthy. His eyes went over Bella the way Harrison's had, the way they all did, and something in them settled, satisfied. "Charming," Cesare said. "Younger than I expected. I approve." Bella looked between them and felt the floor tilt. "Approve of what?" "Don Cesare," Renata said, "has generously agreed to overlook the unpleasantness of the Harrison affair. He is a man of the world. He understands that young women are sometimes foolish. He is prepared to make a very substantial contribution to this family's restructuring in exchange for your hand." "No," Bella said. The word fell into the room like a dropped glass. Renata's smile did not waver, but her eyes went flat and dangerous. "You'll forgive her, Don Cesare. She's high-strung. We'll have her ready for the ceremony within the month." "No," Bella said again, louder, and the fear made her reckless. "I won't. You can't. I won't marry him. I won't marry anyone. You've sold me twice now like I'm a—" "That will do." Renata crossed to her, took her by the arm, her manicured nails biting through the sleeve. To Cesare she said sweetly, "Give us one moment, Don Cesare. Bridal nerves." She steered Bella into the hall and shut the door and turned on her with the ice all burned away and only the fury left. "You listen to me, you ungrateful little wretch. Do you understand what Vitale is offering? He is offering to save us, all of us, this house, the name, everything your father built and then let rot. And all it costs is you, a used, ruined thing that no respectable man would take now anyway. You will smile, and you will say yes, and you will be grateful, or I will put you out on the street tonight with nothing, and we will see how long you last." And Bella, with the secret burning inside her, with the impossible small life already rooting itself into her body, understood two things at once. The first was that if she said no, they would break her. The second was that she could not marry Cesare Vitale, because within 2 months her body would tell him a truth that would get her killed. Because men like Vitale did not marry women carrying other men's children. And men like Vitale did not simply file for annulment. They erased the mistake. So she smiled. She went back into the morning room and she smiled at the old man, and she said the words, and she watched Renata's shoulders come down in relief and Cesare's mouth curve in satisfaction, and inside she was already gone, already at the bus station, already 3 cities away with a new life growing under a new name. She would run. She would run before the wedding. She had 2 weeks. That night, alone in the servants' room at the top of the house, Bella took out the small folded map of the country she'd torn from an old atlas in her father's abandoned study and spread it on her knees in the dark. She traced the coast with one finger. There were towns out there where no one knew the name Rossi, where a girl could wait tables or clean rooms or do whatever needed doing, where she could grow round and heavy and give birth under a name she chose herself, and raise a child who would never once be told it was worth only what it could be sold for. It was a fragile, foolish plan. She knew that. She had no references, no papers that mattered, barely enough money to last a month. But it was hers, and it was the first thing in her whole life that had ever been entirely, absolutely hers. And she held on to it, the way she'd once held on to her father's advice, the advice that had turned out to be a lie, because the Rossis did not endure. they only fed their own to wolves. She put her hand on her stomach, still flat, still secret. "Not you," she whispered. "Nobody's going to sell you. Nobody's going to look at you like inventory. I promise you that, whatever it costs me." She would not get her 2 weeks. She would not get one. Sal Moretti did not sleep well anymore, and it was a woman's fault, which was almost funny given his reputation. 31 days. 31 days of a scent he couldn't name, and a memory he couldn't complete, and a fury, growing colder and harder by the week, that Enzo had failed to find her. "She used the service stairs," Enzo said again, for perhaps the 5th time, standing in the penthouse office with the resigned patience of a man who has delivered bad news to Salvatore Moretti before and survived it. No name at the desk. The suite was booked under the family account, so there's no guest registry. The hotel cameras on your floor were down for maintenance that night. Harrison's people scheduled it. It's in their logs. Nothing suspicious. She's a ghost, Sal. A girl in a red dress who came up, spent the night, and walked out. It happens. It does not happen. Sal's voice was very quiet. Not to me. You know that. Enzo did know that. He had known Sal since they were boys. He knew, in broad strokes, if not in detail, the shape of the thing that had haunted his friend since childhood, the reason there had never been women, the reason Sal Moretti's bed had been a monk's cell for 2 decades. And Enzo had noticed, though he would never say so, that his friend had been different this past month. Restless, almost alive, angry in a way that had heat in it instead of just ice. "I don't understand why this one," Enzo said carefully. "You could have any—" "I don't want any." Sal turned from the window. "I want to know who she was. I need to know." He didn't say the rest. That for one night, with her, the thing that had ruled his whole life had simply let go of his throat, and that he needed to understand why, the way a man who has been blind his whole life and seen light for 1 hour needs to understand what happened before the dark comes back for good. Widen it. The party had a guest list. Harrison invited half the East Coast, every family, every associate, every social climber's daughter. Cross it against unmarried women, right age, dark hair, and find out who was drugged. Enzo blinked. Who was? She said something was wrong with her. She could barely stand. It wasn't drink. I know drink. Sal's jaw tightened. Somebody put something in her, which means somebody had a reason to. Find the reason, and you find the girl. It took Enzo 11 days, and when he finally came back, it was with a thin file and a strange expression. "Rossi," he said, setting the folder on Sal's desk. "The old Rossi family. You know them. They're finished, drowning in debt. There was a plan at the Harrison party. Our people talked to a bartender, who talked to a hotel attendant, who suddenly got money he can't explain. The younger Rossi daughter was supposed to be compromised in Harrison's suite to force a marriage that would have bailed the family out. Aphrodisiac in her drink." Enzo paused. The stepmother and the older daughter set it up, but it went wrong. The girl ran, never made it to Harrison's room. Sal had gone very still. The younger daughter, her name? Isabella. Isabella Rossi, 19. No, they lie about the age. She's younger. Enzo slid a photograph across the desk. This is her. And Salvatore Moretti looked down at a girl with dark eyes and dark hair, a girl he had held in the dark for one impossible night, and felt something turn over in his chest that he had thought died with his mother. "There's more," Enzo said, and his voice had changed. "Sal, they've sold her again. To Cesare Vitale. Old man, old family. The kind that makes problems disappear. The wedding's set." He checked the file. 9 days from now. For a long moment, Sal did not move or speak. Outside the wall of glass, the city burned with light, indifferent, and somewhere in it was a girl who had walked out of his bed and into a nightmare, and who did not know, could not know, that the stranger she'd fled was the most dangerous man in the city, and that he had just decided, with the cold and total certainty that had made him what he was, that Cesare Vitale was never going to see his wedding day. "Find out where they're keeping her," Sal said. "And Enzo." He looked up, and Enzo took an involuntary step back from what was in his eyes. "If they've hurt her, if anyone has laid one hand on her—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. "I'll find her," Enzo said. Bella made her move on the night before the dress fitting, because after the dress fitting, there would be no more pretending she was going to go through with it. She had it planned to the minute. Renata took a sleeping draught at 11. Ottavia was out at a club, would not be home until dawn. The old caretaker who locked the doors was half deaf and slept in the basement. Bella would go out the kitchen window that didn't latch properly, over the garden wall where the trellis made a ladder, and from there 4 blocks to the bus station, where a night coach left for the coast at 12:40, and where, with the money sewn into her coat, she could disappear into the enormous, anonymous country beyond this rotting house forever. She had a bag packed, small, just what she could carry. She had a name picked out. She put her hand over her still flat stomach in the dark and whispered, "We're going. Just us. We're going to be all right." And she almost believed it. At 11:20, she climbed out the kitchen window into the cold night air, and she had one foot on the trellis when the floodlights came on. For a blind, panicked second, she thought it was the police. Then she saw the men. There were 3 of them, coming from the garden shadows where they had been waiting. Waiting, she understood with a lurch of pure horror, for exactly this. Renata had not trusted her. Renata had put men on her. "Going somewhere, Miss Rossi?" The one in front was broad and unbothered, one of the family's hired muscle, a man named Bruno she'd seen lurking for a week. "The Signora thought you might try. Come on down, nice and easy." "Don't touch me." But they did touch her. They pulled her off the trellis. Her bag fell and spilled into the wet grass. The folded clothes, the little photograph of her real mother she carried everywhere, the coins scattering. Bella screamed, and a hand clamped over her mouth, and she bit it and was struck for it, hard enough that the garden swam. And then she was being carried back inside like a sack of grain. Renata was waiting in the front hall in her dressing gown, not sleepy at all, and Bella understood the draft had been a lie too, a piece of theatre to make her feel safe enough to run. "I'm disappointed," Renata said, but not surprised. She nodded to Bruno. "The blue room, the one with the bars. Your father put them on when he was afraid of burglars, God rest him, and it turns out they work just as well the other way. She stays there until the wedding, someone with her at all times. She eats what we bring her." Her cold eyes found Bella's. You've made this so much uglier than it needed to be. In 8 days, you'll be Cesare Vitale's problem, and I will never have to look at your ungrateful face again. Until then, I'm pregnant. The words tore out of Bella before she could stop them, a last desperate card flung down in the wreckage of her escape. The hall went silent. Renata's face did something Bella had never seen it do. It emptied. What did you say? I'm pregnant. Bella was crying now, shaking in the grip of the men. From that night, the Harrison party, you drugged me and I ended up. I'm carrying his child. Vitale can't marry me. You can't sell me. When he finds out, he'll kill me. You know he will. So you have to let me. The slap, this time, knocked her to the floor. Whose? Renata hissed, crouching over her, all pretense of ice gone. Whose child? Harrison's? Some stranger's? You've been carrying this filth under my roof, and you were going to let Cesare? Do you have any idea? She stood abruptly, pressing her hands to her temples, and Bella watched a dozen calculations race behind her stepmother's eyes. Then, terribly, Renata grew calm again. It changes nothing. We move the wedding up. 4 days. We get you to the altar and into his bed before there's anything to see. And then, whatever it is, it's his, isn't it? A honeymoon child. Men like Vitale want an heir more than anything. He'll never question it. She looked down at Bella with something worse than hatred, with the flat appraisal of a woman looking at inventory. Clean her up. Blue room, and for God's sake, don't let her fall down any stairs. That baby just became the most valuable thing about her. They dragged Bella up to the blue room, her father's old study with its wrought iron bars on the windows, and locked her in. And she lay on the narrow cot in the dark, with her arms wrapped around the child no one would let her protect. And for the first time since that night, she thought of the stranger not with shame, but with a wild, hopeless longing. If you were real, she thought at the man whose name she didn't know, if you were anything at all, now would be the time. 4 floors below and half a city away, Salvatore Moretti was pulling on his gloves. They came at 3 in the morning, when even a guarded house sleeps. Bella woke to sound, not the sound she expected, not shouting, but a strange, spreading quiet, the quiet of a household being unmade, room by room. A soft thud, a cut-off voice, footsteps that were not the shuffling steps of the caretaker or the heavy tread of Bruno, but something quick and certain and many. She sat up on the cot, heart hammering, and pressed herself into the corner. The lock on the blue room door was not picked. It was simply destroyed. One blow, the frame splintering, and then the door swung open onto the hall, and a man filled the doorway with the light behind him so she could not see his face. Only his shape, tall and broad and still, and the 2 men behind him with guns held low and easy. Bella's breath stopped. Isabella Rossi. The man's voice was low, rough, and something in it reached into her chest and closed around her heart, because she knew it. Half dreaming, drugged in the dark, she had heard this voice say, "Who are you?" against her hair. "It's you," she whispered. You're real." He stepped into the room, and the light caught his face at last. The hard, beautiful, brutal face from the bed. The scar through the eyebrow, the dark eyes that were not dead at all, that were fixed on her with an intensity that should have frightened her, and instead undid her completely. "You ran," Sal said. It was not an accusation. It was almost wonder. "I woke up and you were gone." 31 days. He crossed the small room and crouched before the cot so they were eye to eye, and he did not touch her. She would understand much later what that restraint cost him and what it meant. But he looked at her as though he were memorizing her. "I've been looking for you every day since. Do you understand? Every day." Behind him, one of his men said quietly, "Boss, the stepmother's awake, and there's the old woman, and the caretaker, and 4 of Vitali's men we've got zip-tied downstairs. We should move." In a moment, Sal did not look away from Bella. "They locked you in," he said, and now the wonder was gone, and only the cold was left, the cold that had buried 4 rival bosses. Bars on the windows, in your own father's house. "They're going to sell me," Bella heard herself say. "To Cesare Vitale. The wedding's in 4 days. I tried to run and they—" She stopped. Her hand had gone, without her permission, to her stomach. Sal's eyes followed the movement, went still. The whole room seemed to hold its breath. "Isabella." His voice had changed again. Careful now, so careful, the voice of a man diffusing something. That night, there was no one else. It was not a question, but she answered it anyway, her chin coming up, because she had lost everything and would not, now, lose her dignity. "There has never been anyone else. Only you. And I don't even know your name." For a long moment, Salvatore Moretti simply looked at the girl he had crossed a city and broken a family's door to find, at the dark eyes and the bruise blooming on her cheek, and the small, protective curve of her hand over her belly. And something happened in his face that his own men had never once seen there. A cracking, a flood. "Salvatore," he said. "My name is Salvatore Moretti." He watched the name land, watched her understand, because everyone in their world understood that name, exactly whose bed she had fled, exactly what manner of man was crouched before her. He watched fear flicker in her eyes, and, remarkably, watched it go, replaced by something steadier. "Moretti," she repeated. "Yes." "They said you couldn't—" She stopped, colouring. "There are things people say about you." "I know what they say." A ghost of something that was almost a smile. "They're wrong. You're the proof they're wrong." He stood, and now he did offer his hand, palm up, an invitation and not a command. "You're carrying my child, Isabella, which means you are the only thing in this world that matters to me, and I am not leaving you in a room with bars on the windows for 1 more minute. Come with me. No one will ever touch you again. I give you my word, and I have never, in my life, broken it." Downstairs, Renata's voice rose in outrage, cut short by the flat calm of one of Sal's men. Bella looked at the offered hand, the bruised knuckles, the black glove, and thought of every hand that had ever been raised against her in this house. And then she put her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and sure, and he drew her up off the cot and behind him, shielding her with his own body as they went out into the hall. And Bella Rossi walked out of her father's rotting house on the arm of the most dangerous man in the city, and did not look back. Renata was standing in the front hall in her dressing gown, flanked by two of Sal's men, her face a mask of fury and dawning terror as she finally understood who had come into her house in the dark. "Moretti," she breathed, and then, recovering, drawing herself up, "This is an outrage. You break into my home, you assault my staff, You cannot simply take her. She is promised. There are contracts. Don Cesare Vitale will—" "Cesare Vitale," Sal said, "will do nothing." He kept Bella behind him, one hand at the small of her back, and his voice was almost pleasant, which was somehow the most frightening thing of all. "I spoke with Cesare an hour ago. He has withdrawn from the arrangement. He sends his regrets. He was very accommodating once certain facts were explained to him." He tilted his head. "You understand, Signora, that the girl you were about to sell to him is carrying my child, my heir. Did you know that?" The blood drained from Renata's face. On the stairs, where she had appeared in a silk robe with her blonde hair tumbled, Ottavia went white. That's not possible," Renata stammered. "It's entirely possible. In fact, it's certain." Sal took one step toward her, and she flinched back. "You drugged this girl, your own daughter, stepdaughter, and you plan to hand her and my child to Cesare Vitale, a man who would have cut the truth out of her the moment he learned it. You put bars on her window. You struck her." His gaze went deliberately to the bruise on Bella's cheek, and his voice dropped so low it was barely sound. "I want you to understand something, Renata Rossi. From this moment, Isabella is under my protection. She belongs to the Moretti family. If you or your daughter or any man you hire ever comes within sight of her again, I will not send men in the night to frighten you. I will take everything. This house, your accounts, the little you have left, and the name you're so desperate to save. I will make the Rossi name a thing people spit. Do you believe me?" Renata's mouth opened and closed. She believed him. Everyone always believed Salvatore Moretti. Good. He turned away from her as though she had ceased to exist, which, in every way that mattered, she just had. To Bella, gently. "Is there anything here you want? Anything of yours?" Bella thought of the little photograph of her real mother, spilled into the wet grass of the garden and left behind in the ruin of her escape. Her throat tightened. "There was a picture in the garden, my mother's." "Marco?" Sal didn't raise his voice. One of his men melted out the door and returned 2 minutes later with the small, water-stained photograph, carrying it as carefully as if it were made of glass, and put it into Bella's hands. She held it to her chest, and, absurdly, that was the thing that finally made her cry. Not the terror or the rescue, but the small kindness of a killer's man wiping mud off her mother's face. "Anything else?" Sal asked. She shook her head. "There's nothing else here that's mine." "Then we're done." He looked once more at Renata, at Ottavia frozen on the stairs, and Bella saw him file them away. Not forgotten, she understood. Filed. For later. "Enjoy your wedding that won't happen, Signora. Enjoy explaining to your creditors why the Vitale money isn't coming." A thin, cold smile. "Endure. Isn't that the Rossi motto? Let's see how you endure." And then his hand was warm at her back again, steering her out into the night, where 3 black cars waited with their engines running and their headlights off, and men in dark suits stood at the doors like an honor guard. The night air was cold and clean and smelled of rain and freedom. Sal opened the door of the centre car himself, and Bella slid into leather seats, warmer and softer than any bed she'd slept in for years. He got in beside her. The door shut with a heavy, expensive sound, sealing out the house, the women, the bars, all of it. "Where are you taking me?" she asked. Her voice shook only a little. "Home." He was looking at her in the dark, and there was that intensity again, that hunger that wasn't quite hunger, that need to simply see her. "My home. You'll have your own rooms, guards, doctors, the best there are, for you and the child. You will never want for anything again, and you will never be afraid again, and no one," his jaw worked, "no one will ever put their hands on you while I'm alive." Bella looked at this man she had known for 1 drugged night and 31 days of absence, this stranger who had torn down a locked door to reach her, and asked the only question that mattered. Why? Sal was quiet for a long moment as the car pulled into the sleeping city. When he answered, it was not the answer she expected, and not, she would later realize, the whole truth. Because the whole truth was something Salvatore Moretti did not yet know how to say. "Because you're carrying my heir," he said, "and I protect what's mine." It would be weeks before either of them understood how much more than that it already was. The Moretti estate was not a house so much as a held breath, a great pale mansion set behind iron gates on 12 acres of hills outside the city, where the men who opened the gates carried guns beneath their coats, and the gardens were beautiful, and the shadows were watched. Bella woke on her first morning there, in a bed so large and soft she had, in the disoriented moment between sleep and waking, no idea where she was. Then it came back. The broken door, the cars, the long silent drive, Sal handing her over at the top of a grand staircase to a stern grey-haired woman named Graziella, who was, apparently, the housekeeper, and who had looked Bella up and down and pronounced, "You need soup and sleep, in that order," before steering her to these rooms and leaving her to collapse. Now sunlight streamed through tall windows. There were fresh clothes laid out, soft, expensive, in her size, which meant someone had measured her while she slept, or simply known. There was a tray by the bed with tea and dry toast, the exact things a nauseated pregnant woman could keep down, which meant someone had thought about that too. Bella lay very still and tried to understand a world in which people thought about what she needed. She found Sal in a glass-walled room off the terrace, drinking black coffee and reading something on a tablet, and he rose when she came in. Actually rose, the way men in old films did, and the small courtesy left her strangely off balance. "You slept," he said. "Good. The doctor comes at 11. She's the best obstetrician in the state, and she's discreet, which matters more in our world than you'd think." He gestured to a chair, and she sat, and he did not sit close to her, she noticed. He kept a careful, deliberate distance, and there was something studied about it, something that was not indifference. "Why are you being kind to me?" Bella said. It came out more baldly than she meant. Sal considered the question as though it were a serious one, which she was coming to understand was simply how he treated everything. "Because you've been carrying my child alone and afraid," he said, "in a house that treated you like livestock, and I find that I have a great deal of—" He paused, choosing the word, "feeling" about that. "More than I expected." "But you don't know me." "No." His dark eyes rested on her. "I intend to." The doctor came. There was an ultrasound, a small grey flicker of a heartbeat on a screen, and Bella watched Sal Moretti, head of the Moretti family, breaker of doors, the man whose name made grown men go quiet, stare at that flickering image with an expression of such naked wonder that she had to look away, because it felt like watching something private. "It's real," he said quietly, to no one. "Very real," the doctor confirmed, smiling. "About 9 weeks. Healthy? Mother's a little underweight and anemic. We'll fix that. Otherwise, perfect." When the doctor had gone, Sal walked Bella back through the great house, and she asked the question that had been forming since she woke. "You said there are things people say about you, that you can't, that you're sterile, impotent." He said the words without flinching. "Yes, that's the story." "But it's not true." They had stopped in a long gallery hung with dark, old portraits, Moretti ancestors, hard-faced men and veiled women, and one covered canvas at the end, draped in black cloth, that Bella's eye kept returning to. "It's not that it isn't true," Sal said slowly, and this was the first time she saw him choose his words not to conceal, but to confess. "It's that it was true, in a way, for a very long time. There have been no women, Isabella, not because I couldn't, because I couldn't bear to. There's a thing in me, since I was a child. When a woman comes close, when one touches me, something happens that I've never been able to control or explain. Fear, revulsion, a kind of drowning. I've lived my whole adult life as a monk, and I let the world believe the ugly story because the true one is a weakness, and men like me cannot afford weaknesses." Bella stared at him. "But that night—" "That night I was drunk, truly drunk, for the first time in years, because I'd done something that afternoon that I needed to drown." His eyes met hers. "And you came through my door, burning up and frightened and asking for help, and I reached for you, and the thing that has ruled my whole life, it wasn't there. For the first time since I was 11 years old, a woman touched me, and I felt no terror. Only you." He said it plainly, but she could see what it cost. "I have spent 31 days trying to understand why. And I think part of me tore that door down last night, not only for the child. I think part of me needed to know you were real, that the 1 hour I've been free in 20 years wasn't a thing I dreamed." The covered canvas at the end of the gallery seemed to pulse in Bella's vision. "What happened to you?" she asked softly, "when you were 11? Sal followed her gaze to the black-draped painting, and his face closed like a door. "Not today," he said. "But someday. I'll tell you someday." And it was, she realized, the most intimate promise he could have made. The days folded into weeks, and the great pale house that had felt like a gilded prison began, without Bella quite noticing when, to feel like something else. Sal was gone often. The business of the family was ceaseless and dark, and she asked no questions about it, understanding by instinct that there were rooms in his life She should not enter. But he came home. That was the thing she could not get over. Every night, however late, he came home, and he would find her wherever she was. In the library, she'd claimed, in the kitchen where Graziella was teaching her to cook the heavy Sicilian dishes of Sal's childhood, on the terrace, watching the lights of the distant city, and he would sit near her, always at that careful distance, and they would talk. She learned him slowly, the way you learn a language. She learned that he read voraciously and secretly philosophy and history, and was embarrassed by it. That he had a dry, unexpected humour that surfaced only when he was tired. That he had loved his father and feared him in equal measure, and that his father was dead by a rival's hand, and Sal had avenged him within the year, and taken the family at 22 with the blood barely dry. That he had no friends except Enzo, whom he loved like a brother and would die for. That he was, beneath the ice and the danger, one of the loneliest people she had ever met. He learned her, too. He learned that she was not, as her family had reduced her to, a timid thing, that there was steel in her, forged in years of surviving Renata, and that she said exactly what she thought when she trusted the person she was saying it to. He learnt that she sang under her breath when she cooked, old songs her real mother had taught her before she died. He learnt that she was fiercely, ferociously already in love with the child inside her, that she talked to it, made it promises, and that she had made those same promises alone in a locked room, certain no one would ever help her keep them. He learnt that she wasn't afraid of him, and that undid him more than anything. "You should be," he told her one night on the terrace when she'd said as much. "Everyone is." "I've been afraid my whole life," Bella said. Wrapping her hands around a mug of the tea he now kept stocked because he'd noticed she liked it. "Of Renata, of Ottavia, of what they'd do, what they'd sell me for, whether I'd wake up in a marriage to a stranger. Real fear, the kind that lives in your stomach for years." She looked at him. "You're the first person in a long time who's made me feel like I don't have to be afraid. So no, I'm not afraid of you. I think you might be the least frightening thing that's ever happened to me. Which I understand is absurd, given—" She gestured vaguely at the guarded grounds, the men in the shadows. "All of this." Something moved in Sal's face. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, watching her the whole time as though he were approaching a fire, he reached across the small distance between their chairs and put his hand over hers where it rested on the arm of her chair. It was the first time he had touched her, sober, since the night that made the child. Bella went very still. She understood, without being told, that this was enormous, that this small, warm weight of his hand over hers was a man reaching across 22 years of terror. She did not move. She barely breathed. She let him keep his hand there, and she turned her own hand over, slowly, until their palms met, and she laced her fingers loosely through his. Sal's breath came out unsteady. "Anything?" she asked softly. "The fear?" "No." His voice was rough. "Nothing. Only—" He looked at their joined hands as though he'd never seen anything like it. Only you. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, while the city glittered far below and the guards paced the invisible perimeter, and something that had been broken in a boy for 2 decades began, very quietly, to knit itself back together in the dark. Later, walking her to her rooms, he stopped at her door. He did not come in, but he lifted her hand and pressed his mouth to her knuckles. The same gesture Harrison had made in the ballroom a lifetime ago. And it had been a claiming then, a possession. And now it was something entirely different, tentative and reverent and asking. "Good night, Isabella." "Bella," she said. "My friends call me Bella." Called. I didn't have many. A small smile. "You can." "Bella." He said it like he was tasting it. "Good night, Bella." She lay awake a long time after, her hand still warm where his mouth had been, and understood, with a mix of terror and wonder, that she was falling in love with Salvatore Moretti, and that, impossibly, he might be falling too. He told her about his mother on a night of storms. The rain had come in hard off the hills, hammering the tall windows, and Bella had found him standing in the portrait gallery in the dark, a glass of wine untouched in his hand, staring at the black draped canvas at the end. She almost withdrew, but he heard her, and without turning he said, "Come. I said I'd tell you someday. Someday is a night like this." She came and stood beside him. Lightning lit the room white. "Her name was Lucia," Sal said. "My mother. She was beautiful the way that dangerous things are beautiful. My father worshipped her and feared her, the way I—" He stopped. "The way men in this family seem to love. She was lonely. He was cruel and always working, and she was young and lonely in a house full of guns, and she took a lover." He drank. "A soldier of a rival family, as it happened. The stupidest possible choice. She used to bring me with her, sometimes, to the apartment where they met. A little boy is good cover. No one questions a mother taking her son to the park, to the pictures. I was 11. I sat in the front room with a book while," his jaw tightened, "while my mother was in the other room. I heard things a child shouldn't hear, and didn't understand, and understood anyway. Do you see? I loved her, and she used me. She made me part of the thing that was going to destroy us, and she made me love her while she did it. Sal." "My father found out. Of course he found out. Men like us always find out." He set the wine down on a marble table. His hand was steady, which was somehow worse. He didn't confront her. He was too proud. He waited, and he planned. And one night he sent me to my grandmother's, and when I came back 3 days later, there was a small closed casket in the front hall, and everyone was in black, and no one would tell me anything. They said it was an accident, a car. But I'd heard the men talking, the way children hear things. I knew what my father had done. And the worst part, his voice finally cracked, one hairline fracture. The worst part is that for years I thought it was my fault. Because I'd been the cover. Because if I hadn't sat in that front room with my book, if I'd told my father, if I'd been a better son, a smarter son. "You were 11, Bella said fiercely. "You were a child. None of it was yours to carry." "I know that now." He looked at her, and in the stormlight his eyes were wet, and she understood she was seeing something no one else alive had ever seen. But I didn't know it at 11 or 15 or 25. What I knew was that a woman's love was the most dangerous thing in the world, that it made you weak, and being weak got you killed, and that if a woman ever got close enough to touch me, she would find the soft place and put the knife in. My body learned it before my mind did. The fear, the freezing. I couldn't let anyone near me, because near me was where the wound was, and the wound had my mother's perfume. He exhaled. Jasmine. She wore jasmine. For years I couldn't smell it without being sick. Bella thought of the night in the penthouse, of Sal murmuring something about her scent, about jasmine that was not jasmine. That night you said I smelled like... You smelled like you, warm and a little sweet, and underneath it just skin, a person, not perfume, not a weapon, just you. He shook his head slowly. I've thought about it 1,000 times. Why you? Why that night? I think it was the wine, partly. My defences were gone. But I think it was also that you came to me needing help, not looking for a soft place to put a knife. You were more frightened than I was. And something in me that had been braced for the blade for 20 years just stood down. For one night, it stood down. He reached out in the dark and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and his hand lingered against her cheek, and Bella leaned into it. And then you were gone, and I had 1 hour of not being afraid to hold on to for 31 days, and I would have torn down every door in this city to find it again. Thunder rolled. The rain came down. Show me, Bella said. The painting. Her. Sal looked at the black-draped canvas for a long moment. Then he reached up and drew the cloth away, and there was Lucia Moretti, dark-eyed, beautiful, faintly sad, so like Sal it hurt, looking down at them out of the past. She was my mother, Sal said quietly, and she loved me, and she hurt me, and she died for a choice that had nothing to do with me. Both things are true. I'm only just learning that both things can be true. He turned from the painting to Bella, and there was something new in his face, something like the beginning of peace. You're teaching me that two things can be true, that a person can be dangerous and safe, that love doesn't have to be a knife. He left the painting uncovered. It was, Bella understood, the most important thing he had ever done. She kissed him a week later, and it was she who did it, because she understood by then that he would never make himself take from a woman the thing that had been used to break him. It was an ordinary evening. She was showing him something in a book, laughing at his skepticism, and she looked up, and he was watching her mouth, and there was such longing and such fear tangled together in his face that her heart simply broke open. So she leaned across the small distance and kissed him, softly, carefully, the way you'd approach a wounded animal, giving him every chance to pull away. He went rigid. She felt the old terror seize him, felt him start to freeze, and then felt him, by sheer force of will, choose not to. His hand came up and cradled the back of her head, and he kissed her back, clumsily at first, out of practice by 2 decades, and then with a hunger that made her dizzy, and when they broke apart, he was breathing hard, and his eyes were wild. "I'm sorry," he said. I might not be able to." "We have time," Bella said. "All the time in the world. Whatever you can do, whatever you can't, it doesn't change anything." She pressed her forehead to his. "I'm not going anywhere. I already know your worst secret, and I'm still here. Do you understand? I'm still here." Sal made a sound that was almost a laugh and almost a sob, and held her, just held her, his face buried in her hair, breathing her in, the scent that had haunted him, the person that had saved him. And for a long time, neither of them spoke. The threat arrived the next morning. Enzo brought it, grim-faced, into the glass room where Sal and Bella were eating breakfast. He hesitated when he saw them sitting close, saw Sal's hand resting easily over Bella's on the table, a sight that would have been impossible 3 months ago. And something crossed his face that Bella was too happy to read correctly. She would remember it later. "We have a problem," Enzo said. Sal's whole manner changed, the tenderness sliding away, the ice returning. "Talk." "Words out. About her." Enzo nodded at Bella. "About the baby. I don't know how, we've been careful, but it's out. The other families know Salvatore Moretti has a woman carrying his heir." He set a phone on the table. On it was a message, a photograph. Bella in the garden 2 days ago, taken through a long lens from beyond the wall. "The Barzinis know, the Vitala family knows, and old Cesare is nursing a grudge about being made to withdraw. And there's chatter I don't like, about what an heir means for the balance of things." Bella felt the warmth of the morning drain away. "What does it mean?" It was Sal who answered, and his voice was flat and cold. "It means everything. A man with no heir is a man whose empire dies with him. The other families can afford to wait me out, let the Moretti holdings scatter when I'm gone. They've been counting on it for years. The rumours that I couldn't father a child, they liked those rumours. They planned around them." He looked at the photograph of Bella through the long lens, and Bella watched his knuckles go white. "But an heir changes the arithmetic. An heir means the Moretti family continues, grows. It makes me stronger, and it makes them afraid. And frightened men in our world do frightened things." "Like what?" Bella whispered, though she already knew. "Like trying to remove the heir before it's born," Enzo said quietly. "Or the mother. Or both." The room was silent. Outside, the garden where Bella had walked freely 2 days ago suddenly looked exposed, watched, dangerous. Sal stood. When he spoke, it was with the terrible calm that Bella was learning meant he had gone somewhere very cold inside himself. "Triple the men on the grounds. No one comes or goes without my personal approval. Bella doesn't leave the house. I'm sorry, Bella. I know what it is to be locked in, and I swear to you, this is not that. This is the opposite of that. But I need you safe." He turned to her, and the coldness cracked, just for her. "I lost 20 years to fear. I am not going to lose you and our child to some frightened old man with a long lens. I'll burn the whole city down first. Do you understand me? The whole city." And Bella, who had once lain in a locked room begging a nameless stranger to be real, looked at the man that stranger had turned out to be, dangerous, damaged, and hers, and believed him utterly. "I understand," she said. "But Sal—" She caught his hand. "Don't burn yourself down with it. You've only just started to be free. Don't let them make you into ice again. Not even for us." He looked at her for a long moment, and something in him seemed to hear her and to promise. But she saw, too, the old cold rising, the Mafia Boss reasserting himself over the man she'd been slowly uncovering, and she felt a chill of premonition. The storm was coming, and she was not sure yet which Salvatore would meet it. The first attempt came 10 days later, and it came, as the worst betrayals always do, from inside. Bella was in the library when the alarms went. Not loud, the Moretti alarms were never loud, but a low, urgent pulsing through the house that made every guard move at once. Graziella appeared out of nowhere and had Bella by the arm, moving her toward the safe room behind the wine cellar that Sal had shown her the week before, murmuring, "This way, cara, quickly, don't run. Running makes you fall." And Bella went, her heart slamming, one hand cradling the curve of her belly that had begun in the last weeks to show. Behind her she heard shouting, a gunshot, flat and shocking, another. The safe room was small and steel-lined, and Graziella sealed them in, and they waited in the dim red emergency light. Graziella praying under her breath in Sicilian, Bella breathing slow and deep the way the doctor had taught her, telling the baby it was all right, it was all right, it was all right, when she did not know if it was. It was 40 minutes before the knock came, in the pattern Sal had made her memorize, and then the door opened, and he was there. And there was blood on him again. Not his, she saw with a wave of relief, not his. And he crossed the little room in 2 steps and pulled her against him and held her so tightly it hurt. "You're all right," he said into her hair. "You're all right." "What happened?" He drew back. His face was terrible. 3 men came over the east wall. They knew where the cameras were. They knew the patrol pattern. They knew which room was yours. His voice was very controlled, which was how she knew how close he was to losing control entirely. "They didn't guess any of that, Bella. Somebody told them." The word landed like a stone in still water. A traitor. Someone inside. "Enzo's questioning the 2 we took alive," Sal said. "The third," he didn't finish. "But there's no question anymore. Someone in this house, someone I trust, is feeding the Barzinis. Someone who knew you'd be in your rooms at that hour, on that day." Over the next days, the fortress turned inward on itself, and Bella watched the man she loved become a hunter in his own home. He trusted no one now. He slept in a chair outside her door with a gun in his lap. The tenderness of those first weeks was still there. She saw it every time he looked at her, felt it every time he touched her. And he touched her more now, as though the danger had burned away the last of his fear. But wrapped around it was a killing coldness she found harder and harder to reach through. And then Enzo cracked the captured men and brought Sal a name, and it was the one name Sal would have died before suspecting. Bella was there when he came in with it. She saw Enzo's face, pale, sick, and she saw Sal go still. "Say it again," Sal said. "Marco." Enzo's voice was barely a whisper. Marco, the quiet young soldier who had wiped the mud off Bella's mother's photograph the night of the rescue, who had been at Sal's side for 6 years, who Sal had trusted with his life 100 times. The Barzinis got to him months ago. Gambling debts. They own him. He gave them the layout, the patrols, everything. He's the leak. For a long moment, Salvatore Moretti did not move or speak, and Bella watched the betrayal do something to his face that the danger never had. Watched the old wound crack open, the boy who had learned that the people you love put knives in the soft places, that trust was a door that let the killing in. "Sal," she said softly. He didn't hear her. He was already somewhere cold and far away. "Where is he now?" Sal said. "Downstairs. We took him an hour ago. He doesn't know we know." Enzo hesitated. "Sal, what do you want to do?" And Bella saw her lover stand at a crossroads she couldn't follow him past. The man she'd been healing on one side, and on the other the ice, the family, the 20 years of teaching himself that mercy was how they got you. "Bella," Sal said without looking at her, "go with Graziella." "Sal, please." And there was something in the word, a plea from a man who never pleaded, that made her go. But at the door she stopped and looked back at him, at the terrible stillness of him, and she said the only thing she had. "Whatever you do down there," she said, "come back up as yourself, not as him, as you. I'll be waiting for you. Me and—" her hand went to her belly. "Both of us. Come back to us." He looked at her then, and she couldn't read what was in his face. And she left, not knowing which man would climb the stairs when it was done. Bella waited in her rooms for 2 hours, and they were the longest of her life. She did not know what was happening below. She knew only the silences of the great house, the muffled sounds she couldn't identify, and the memory of the coldness in Sal's face when he'd asked her to leave. She sat by the window, with her hands folded over her belly, and she made herself breathe. And she thought about the boy who had sat in a front room with a book while his mother sowed the seeds of the family's ruin. The boy who had learned that love was a knife. And she prayed, to whom she wasn't sure, that the man she'd been uncovering would be the one to come back up the stairs. When the door finally opened, she stood. Sal came in alone. He had changed his clothes. There was no blood on him now. He looked exhausted in a way she'd never seen, hollowed out, and he stopped just inside the door, as though he wasn't sure he had the right to come closer. "Is it done?" Bella said quietly. "It's done." She didn't ask what done meant. She had made a kind of peace in these months with the fact that she loved a man who did things she would never be allowed to see, and that some of those things ended lives. But she needed to know one thing. "Marco, is he alive?" Sal's voice was rough. "I sent him away. Him and his mother. He has a mother in the old country, sick. The debts were hers. That's how the Barzinis got him, gambling to pay for her care." He laughed, short and bitter. I sat down there looking at him, at a man who'd betrayed me, who'd told them which room you slept in, and every instinct I have, everything my father taught me, everything 20 years in this life has hammered into me, said the same thing. Make an example, so the next one thinks twice. He crossed to the window and stood looking out at the guarded dark. "And then I heard you. Come back up as yourself, not as him." And I thought about my father, who never once in his life chose mercy, who solved every wound by making a bigger one, who murdered my mother rather than survive being hurt by her. He turned. "I don't want to be him, Bella. I've spent my whole life being afraid of becoming a victim, and somewhere along the way I became my father instead, which is worse. So I sent Marco away, stripped of everything, exiled, watched. He'll never come near us again, and he knows exactly how close he came. But alive. His mother gets her care. And the message that goes out isn't that Salvatore Moretti is soft. It's that Salvatore Moretti is something the other families have never had to reckon with before. A thin, tired smile. Someone they can't predict. Bella crossed the room and put her arms around him, and he held her, and she felt some enormous tension go out of him, the tension of a man who had stood at a crossroads and for the first time chosen the harder road. "You came back," she whispered, "as yourself." "You brought me back." He drew back enough to look at her. "You keep doing that, bringing me back. I don't know who I'd be by now without you. I don't think I'd be anyone I'd want to be." That night, for the first time, he did not sleep in the chair outside her door. He came in, and she took his hand, and they lay together in the great soft bed in the dark, fully clothed, just holding each other. And it was not about the thing that had made the child. That would come later, slowly, patiently, as he learned that a body could be a home and not a battlefield. It was about something simpler and larger. It was about a man who had been alone inside himself for 22 years, falling asleep with his head on a woman's shoulder, her hand in his hair, and not being afraid. He slept, finally, deeply. Bella lay awake a while longer, watching him, this dangerous, broken, beautiful man, and she thought, whatever comes, we survived tonight. He chose to be himself, and I helped him do it. Surely the worst is behind us. She was wrong, of course. The worst was still coming. But it would find them stronger than it expected, because it would find them together, and because a truth was about to surface that would change everything Bella thought she knew about who she was and why she had ever ended up in that penthouse at all. The truth started with a phone call at dawn, and a name Sal had thought long buried. His mother's name. Because Lucia Moretti, it would turn out, had not died in that car at all. The woman came to the gates of the Moretti estate 3 days later, alone, in a plain black car, and asked for Salvatore by his childhood name. Enzo brought word to the breakfast table, white-faced. "There's a woman at the gate, older. She won't give a name to the men. She told me to tell you." He swallowed. "She told me to say, the Blue Room. She's sorry about the Blue Room." "Sal, I don't—" Sal had gone the colour of ash. He set down his coffee very carefully, as though if he moved too fast, he might shatter. "The Blue Room," he repeated. That was what my mother called the nursery, my nursery, when I was small. She'd say, 'Come to the Blue Room, Piccolo, and read to me.'" His hands were not steady. "No one alive knows that. No one. She's been dead for 22 years. Bella reached for his hand. "Sal, what are you saying?" He didn't answer. He stood and walked out, and Bella, after one frozen moment, followed, and Enzo followed her, and none of them could have stopped what was coming any more than they could have stopped the sunrise. The woman waited in the front hall, the same hall where Sal had once found a small, closed casket. She was perhaps 60, silver-haired, still beautiful in the ruined way of women who were once very beautiful. And when she lowered the black veil from her face, Bella heard Sal make a sound she had never heard a grown man make. It was Lucia, the woman from the painting, aged 22 years. Alive. "Salvatore," Lucia Moretti said, and her voice broke on it. My boy, look at you. You're the image of... You're dead. Sal's voice was a stranger's. There was a casket. My father. I heard the men. He killed you. He told me you were dead. I stood in this hall, and they told me... Your father tried to kill me. Lucia's eyes were wet. He found out about Matteo, and he came for me. And I ran. I ran with nothing, in the night, and one of his own men, a man who cared for me. He let me go, instead of putting me in the ground. And he staged the accident, the casket, to buy me time and to keep your father from hunting me. He told your father it was done. And I ran, Salvatore. I ran across an ocean, and I stayed gone because I knew, if your father ever learned I lived, he would finish it, and he would punish you for my sins. She took a step toward him, and he flinched back, and she stopped, and the grief on her face was terrible. I left you. I know what I did. I left an 11-year-old boy to believe his mother was dead, because staying meant we both died. Every day, for 22 years, I have... Don't. Sal's voice cracked like a whip. Don't you dare. Do you know what you left me? Do you know what it did to me? Believing my father murdered you. Believing it was my fault because I was your cover. Because I sat in that room while you... He was shaking now. I couldn't touch a woman for 20 years. 20 years, because the last woman I loved used me and left me and got herself killed. Except she didn't even do me the mercy of dying. She just left and let me carry her funeral for 2 decades. Sal. Bella was at his side, her hand on his arm. Sal, breathe. Breathe with me. But Lucia's eyes had gone past her son to Bella, and to the curve of her belly. And something happened in the older woman's face, recognition and shock, and a dawning horror that made no sense. "Who is this?" Lucia whispered. "Salvatore, who is this girl?" "My wife," Sal said, though they weren't married. Not yet, not officially. But he said it without hesitation, and Bella's heart turned over. "She's carrying my child." "Why?" Lucia's hand had gone to her mouth. She was staring at Bella as though she was seeing a ghost, and when she spoke, it was barely audible. "What is your name, child?" "Isabella," Bella said, unnerved. "Isabella Rossi." "No." Lucia shook her head slowly. "No, that's not. Rossi is the family that raised you, but that's not." Her eyes filled. "Your mother. Your true mother. Do you know her name?" Bella felt the floor shift beneath her. "She died when I was small. Her name was... My father always said her name was..." And then a memory, an old photograph, water-stained, rescued from a garden. "Sophia. Her name was Sophia." Lucia Moretti closed her eyes, and a tear tracked down her ruined, beautiful face. And when she opened them again, she was looking at Bella with a tenderness that made no sense, and a grief that made even less. "Sophia was my sister," Lucia said. "My little sister. She followed me across the ocean when I ran. She raised her daughter under a false name in a family that took her in and used her. And she died before she could ever tell that daughter the truth." Her voice broke completely. "You are my niece, Isabella. You are Moretti blood, which means—" The world tilted. Bella heard Sal's sharp intake of breath. "Which means the child you carry," Lucia whispered, "is Moretti on both sides. And it means, God forgive me, that the two of you—" For one horrible, suspended moment, the great hall was utterly silent, and Bella's blood roared in her ears, and the same impossible arithmetic seemed to be racing behind Sal's eyes. "Cousins, we're cousins, the child—" "Stop!" It was Enzo, of all people, stepping forward, and his voice cut through the horror with unexpected steel. "Signora, finish the sentence properly before you break them. You said Sofia was your sister. By blood?" Lucia looked at him, startled, and then, slowly, she shook her head, and the horror in the room began by degrees to recede. "No, not by blood. Sofia was— We called each other sisters. She was the daughter of the woman who raised me after my own mother died. We grew up as sisters. We loved each other as sisters, but there is no blood between us. None." She looked back at Bella, and now there was only tenderness. "You are my family in every way that has ever mattered, but you and Salvatore share not one drop of blood. The child is safe. You are safe. I only meant—" Her voice thickened. "I only meant that fate is strange beyond bearing, that my sister's daughter and my own son found each other across all of this darkness, neither of them knowing, that the girl the Rossis were selling like cattle is the last living piece of the sister I lost. That is what I meant." Bella found she had been holding her breath and let it out in a rush, and Sal's arm came around her, and she felt him shaking too, and understood he had gone to the same terrible place she had and come back. But something else had surfaced in Lucia's words, and it was Sal who caught it, his mind cutting through even his own shock, the way it always did. "The Rossis," he said slowly. "You said the Rossis raised her, under a false name, which means the Rossis knew. Renata knew Bella wasn't her husband's blood daughter at all." Lucia nodded. "Your father, Bella's father, the man you called father. He was a good man, weak, but good. He loved Sofia. When she came to him dying, with a child and no name and no protection, he married her to give the child his name, and he raised you as his own. But the woman he married after Sofia died, Renata—" Lucia's mouth twisted. "She always knew you weren't truly his, that there was no Rossi blood in you. It's why she never loved you. It's why you were always the one to be sold. In her mind, you were never really a daughter. You were a stray your husband dragged home, a thing with no claim on anything." And suddenly, a great many things made sense to Bella. The particular quality of Renata's contempt, the way she'd been treated not as a lesser daughter, but as something that didn't belong at all, a mistake to be monetized. "I'm not a Rossi," Bella said slowly, testing it. And then, with a strange, fierce joy breaking through the shock, "I was never a Rossi at all." "No," Lucia said softly. "You are Sofia's daughter. You are your own. And if you'll have me, if either of you can ever forgive me, you have an aunt, and this child has a grandmother who would give anything, anything, for a chance she does not deserve. Sal was very quiet. Bella looked up at him and saw the war in his face. 22 years of grief and rage on one side, and on the other, a mother returned from the dead, a mother who had run to save them both, a mother who had carried her own exile as a wound every bit as deep as his. "I can't do this today," Sal said finally, and his voice was raw, but not cruel. "I can't. 22 years. And you walk in at breakfast, and I'm supposed to— No, not today." He looked at Lucia, and something in him unbent, just slightly, just enough. "But you're not leaving. You'll stay in the guest wing, under guard, until I know you weren't followed, until I know this isn't some Barzini game. You understand? In our world, I have to know. And then we'll talk. Slowly. I'm learning to do things slowly." A ghost of a glance at Bella. "Someone's been teaching me." Lucia pressed her hand to her mouth and nodded and wept, and it was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was a door left open, and for a man who had spent his life slamming doors and barring them, it was everything. Later, alone, Sal held Bella for a long time. "Cousins," he said against her hair, and laughed shakily. "For 30 seconds I thought, I know. And then, not." He drew back and looked at her. Wonder and exhaustion mingled. "You were never theirs. That house, those women. You never belonged to any of it. You're Sophia's. You're your own." His hand found the curve of their child. "And ours." But even as they held each other, out beyond the guarded walls, the frightened old families were counting a new fact into their arithmetic, that Salvatore Moretti's dead mother had surfaced alive, that the Moretti bloodline was thickening rather than thinning, that the balance was tilting hard the wrong way, and Cesare Vitale, still nursing his humiliation, picked up a telephone and made the call that would bring the storm down on all of them at once. They took Bella from the one place she should have been safest, the doctor's office. It was the single unavoidable trip, a scan the doctor insisted could not be done at the house, and Sal had planned it like a military operation. 3 cars, a route chosen that morning, Enzo himself driving, more men than seemed possible for a routine appointment. And it still went wrong, because Cesare Vitale had spent his humiliation buying the one thing that money can always buy: a moment of chaos on a city street, a garbage truck that stalled at the wrong intersection, a spray of gunfire meant to scatter and separate. In the chaos, they got her. Bella's last sight of Sal was through a car window as hands dragged her the other way. His face as he realized, the animal howl of her name, the way he came out of the car with a gun already in his hand and men already dying around him. And it wasn't enough. It wasn't fast enough. And then a door slammed and the world went dark under a hood, and she was gone. She woke in a cold concrete room, her hands bound, her belly cramping with fear, and made herself breathe, breathe, for the baby, for herself. When the door opened, it was Cesare Vitale who came in, immaculate and smiling, and behind him a face Bella had almost forgotten. Vincent Harrison, balding, soft, his eyes gleaming with old resentment and new opportunity. "Miss Rosie," Harrison said, "or should I say, No, I suppose there's no title for what you are now. Moretti's brood mare. He crouched before her. You ran out on me. Do you know what that cost me? The humiliation. And then I find you belong to Moretti, of all people, carrying he sneered, his miracle heir. The impotent king isn't impotent after all. Imagine what the families would pay to know the whole story. They'll kill you, Bella said, low and certain. Both of you. You have no idea what you've done. He will burn this whole city down to find me. He told me he would, and he doesn't lie. Cesare Vitale laughed. Let him come. That is precisely the point, my dear. A man in love is a man who makes mistakes. Salvatore Moretti has spent 11 years being untouchable because he wanted nothing and feared nothing. And now, he gestured at her belly. Now he wants everything. And it's all in one room, and he will come for it without thinking. And we will be ready. You are not the prize, Isabella. You are the bait. They left her then, in the cold, and Bella sat in the dark and did the only thing she could. She talked to her child, low and steady. She told it about its father, who had been alone and afraid for 20 years, and had learned to love anyway. She told it that its father was coming. And she worked, slowly, patiently, at the bindings on her wrists, with a sharp edge of the concrete block she leaned against, because she was Sophia's daughter. She was her own, and she had survived Renata and a locked room, and a life as a thing to be sold. And she was not going to sit still and be bait. Meanwhile, across the city, Salvatore Moretti had become something the underworld would tell stories about for a generation. He did not rage. That was the terror of it. Enzo, who had known him 30 years, said afterward that he had never seen Sal so calm, so cold, so absolutely without hesitation. He knew it was Vitale within the hour. Vitale and Harrison, the two men who'd wanted Bella and been denied. Because his mother, his returned and unforgiven mother, knew the old family's methods and named the pattern before anyone else could. Lucia Moretti, it turned out, had spent 22 years in exile, learning everything about the men who'd driven her out, and she laid it all at her son's feet like a penance. Cesare keeps a property by the water, Lucia said. He always did. For business he doesn't want seen. Your father knew it. I know it. She met her son's eyes. Let me help you get her back, Salvatore. Let me be your mother for 1 hour, even if you never let me again after. And Sal, cold, focused, terrible, looked at the mother he'd buried and the men around him and made his decision. Everyone, he said, every man we have, every favour I'm owed. Tonight. He checked his weapon. Cesare wants me to come without thinking, so we'll give him a man who came without thinking, at the front, loud. And while he's watching that, his eyes went to Enzo. You and I go in the waterside, the way only someone who knew the old man's habits would know. A glance at his mother. The way she just told us. Lucia's breath caught. You're not forgiven, Sal said to her. But you're useful, and you're blood, and tonight that's enough. He turned to the door, to the night, to the woman and child waiting in the dark. Let's go get my family. They came at midnight from 2 directions, and it went almost exactly as Sal had planned, which is to say it went bloody and fast, and did not go entirely to plan at all. because such things never do. The loud attack came at the front, cars, gunfire, a deliberate roar of chaos that pulled Vitale's men to the landward side. And while they answered it, two shadows came out of the black water on the seaward side, up onto the rocks, into the property through a service door that Lucia Moretti had described from a memory 22 years old, and that was still, incredibly, exactly where she'd said. Bella heard the gunfire start and pressed herself into the corner of her cold room, her wrists finally raw and free, a jagged shard of concrete gripped in her fist. Not much, but she was not going to be found doing nothing. When the door burst open, she swung it up with everything she had. Sal caught her wrist, an inch from his own throat. For one frozen heartbeat, they stared at each other, her wild-eyed, ready to kill, him blood-spattered and calm, and looking at her improvised weapon with something like pride breaking through the ice. "There she is," he said softly, "my wife, Sophia's daughter." He drew her against him, one arm around her, gun still ready in his other hand, already moving her toward the door. "You were going to fight your way out?" "I was going to try." "God, I love you," Sal said. The first time he had said it, there in a concrete room with men dying in the halls, and it was the least romantic and most true declaration Bella would ever receive, and she would treasure it all her life. Getting out was worse than getting in. Harrison tried to run, and Enzo took him, alive, on Sal's order, because Sal had learned the difference now between his father's way and his own, and a living Harrison, ruined and talking, was worth more than a dead one, silent. Cesare Vitale did not run. The old man met Sal in the main room with a pistol of his own and a lifetime of belief that he was untouchable. And he was wrong. And it was very fast. And Bella did not watch, and Sal did not make her. When it was done, when the last of Vitale's men had thrown down their weapons at the sight of the old Don dead on his own imported marble, Salvatore Moretti walked his wife out of that place with his own coat around her shoulders, and the men who saw them, his and what was left of Vitale's both, understood that they had watched the balance of their entire world change in a single night. The reckoning that followed was thorough, and it was cold, and it did not require a single further death. The Barzini family, exposed as the ones who turned Marco and funded the first attempt, found their alliances collapsing overnight as the other families scrambled to distance themselves from a losing side. Sal did not have to move against them. He simply let their fear do the work, and within a season the Barzinis were finished as a power. Vincent Harrison, alive and ruined, gave testimony to the right people about a great many things in exchange for his miserable life, and disappeared into witness anonymity, a broken man, which Sal found more satisfying than a bullet. And the Rossis, Renata and Ottavia, who had drugged a frightened girl and locked her behind bars and sold her twice, did not die either. Sal had promised Bella he would not become his father, and he kept it. Instead, he did what he had told Renata he would do in her own front hall a lifetime ago. He took everything. The debts he quietly bought up and called in all at once. The house sold out from under them. The name, which he made worthless with a few well-placed words in the right ears, so that no bank, no suitor, no ally would touch a Rossi again. Renata and Ottavia ended their days in a small rented flat, genteel and poor and forgotten, which for two women who had worshipped only status and money was a punishment more exquisite than any grave. And every month, on Bella's private instruction that she never explained to anyone but Graziella, a modest sum arrived anonymously, so they would never quite starve. Not mercy, exactly, something colder and finer. The knowledge, delivered monthly, that the girl they'd thrown away was the one keeping them alive. Lucia Moretti was not forgiven in a day, but Sal let her stay, and let her sit with Bella through the last weeks, and let her hold his hand once at the painting she had once been, and slowly, in the way Bella had taught him that two things could be true, that a mother could break you and love you, that love need not be a knife. Something like peace grew up between them. She was there when the baby came. He was born on a bright, cold morning. A son, dark-eyed and furious and perfect, and Salvatore Moretti held his heir in hands that had done terrible things, and wept without shame. And Bella watched the last of the ice go out of him for good. They married that spring, and the whole underworld came, because when Salvatore Moretti summons you, you come. He stood before all of them, the families, the rivals, the men who had once whispered that he was impotent, sterile, cold, with Bella on his arm, in a gown she had chosen herself, and their son in his mother's returned from the dead grandmother's arms. And he did not make a speech about power. He made a speech about her. "You've heard things about me," Sal told the assembled underworld, his voice carrying over the silent hall. "Most of them were true, once. I was cold. I wanted nothing and feared nothing, and you were all more comfortable when that was so." A pause. "This is my wife, Isabella, the mother of my son, and the matriarch of this family, which means she stands above every one of you, and any hand raised against her is a hand raised against me, and you all know by now what that costs." His eyes swept the room, and no one met them long. "But that's not why I brought you here. I brought you here so you'd see her face and know it, because she is the reason I'm no longer the man you were comfortable with. She made me more dangerous than fear ever did." He looked down at her then, and the whole terrifying underworld fell away, and there was only Bella. "She made me a man with something to lose. And a man with something to lose, gentlemen, will burn down the world to keep it. Remember that. Remember her." Later, when the guests had gone, they stood together on the terrace where he had first put his hand over hers, the city glittering far below, their son asleep against Bella's chest. "Do you remember," Bella said, "the last thing you told me in the car that first night, when I asked why you came for me? I said because you were carrying my heir, and I protect what's mine." Sal drew her back against him, his arms coming around both of them, wife and son. "It was true. It just wasn't the truth." "And what's the truth?" He was quiet a moment, this dangerous, healed, terrible, gentle man, looking out at the world he'd conquered and the small, warm family that had conquered him. "That you walked into the one room in the world where a man had forgotten how to be touched," Sal said. "And you touched me, and it didn't hurt. That out of a mistake and a drugged glass and 100 betrayals, I got the only thing I ever needed and never knew how to want." He pressed his lips to her hair. The truth is, I was a ghost for 20 years, Bella, and you were the shadow after the drink that turned out to be more real than any of it. You made me real. Both of you did. Bella turned in his arms and kissed him, unafraid in the light, and below them the city burned on, indifferent and dangerous, and full of men who would tell the story for a generation, the story of the cold king who couldn't be touched, and the throwaway girl who was nobody's blood and everybody's mistake, and how the two of them had walked out of the dark together and never once looked back. The rumours, in the end, had it all wrong. Salvatore Moretti was not impotent, and he was not sterile, and he was not cold. He had only been waiting for the wrong door, the right girl, and the one night that broke him open enough to be saved.